Good morning. Good morning, Rabotai. Welcome to Breakfast in the Class. Breakfast in the Class today is sponsored by Radio Shack. Also by You've Got Questions, We've Got Answers. In the week of Breakfast in the Class is dedicated to loving memory of Maurice's brother Joseph Adis. Yosef Ben Yehudita Abraham, sponsored by Lenore and Maurice Adis. Also for Fu'ah Shlema of Chana Batzema Feg and Yao Shuma Mazal Fortuné. The entire week of learning is dedicated by the Dan Loeb Torah Center Gold donors, John Luke Berebi, for the blessing of his wife Miriam Bat Yudit and their children Noah, Liat, and Ayal, and for the Refuah Shlema of Abraham Ben Malka. Finally, the week of Kobra was sponsored by David E. Ash in honor of you and your substantial capacity to do today and every day. My friends, let us begin. We are now in the final home stretch to the holiday of Purim. And the holiday of Purim carries within it many different themes that a person is able to look at and understand in terms of what they bring to his life. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nivaro. And let me explain what I mean by that. The Yamim Tobim that the Am Yisrael experience and celebrate are meant not to be commemorative days, but rather days of great spiritual value. And what that means is that you're not celebrating something that was. What you're actually doing is tapping into something that is. And the Maharal actually writes that it's not just that once we had that day now has those spiritual sources and energies inside of them in terms of whatever it is that holiday stands for, but actually it goes one step further, to the point where the reason why that day is the day of the holiday is because from the beginning, that day had that koach or that mazal planted within it, waiting to be revealed or to be released. So I'll give you an example. The day of Pesach is a day that features in the Torah before that day is represented as the day of Passover. What happens on the day of Pesach? Everyone knows the Jewish people are redeemed from Egypt. But less people know that is also the day that is the birthday of Yitzchak Avinu. How do we know that? Simplest way of understanding that is because the Pasuk tells us that Abraham told his wife, Lushi va'asi ugot. Chazal explained to us what was he telling her to make. He was telling her to make matzot, to be able to serve to the guests. And if you remember, the Malach actually said, come back next year, shov ashuv, come back next year, I'm going to be back here next year, ke'et chaya, exactly this time, ul Sarah ben. So if he appears on Pesach, when is he going to reappear? A year later, ke'et chaya, shov ashuv, right? Sarah ben is exactly another year to the day. So therefore, we know that Yitzhak Avinu was born on the holiday of Pesach. And therefore, we understand that there's an element of that day which represents cherut and is connected with the power of Yitzchak. How, as an example, is freedom and Yitzchak connected? Many Sfarim talk about this concept. But one of the ideas that's expressed is that the midah of Yitzhak Avinu, which is givurah, is the primary requirement to raise oneself up from avdut lecherut. So in the experience of Egypt, we're finding this midah of gvurah. That's why the Torah keeps telling us again and again that Hashem takes the Jewish people biyad hazakah. God takes out with a mighty hand, because that gvurah is essential part and parcel of the element of freeing oneself. You know, if you ever see someone who's going through rehab for drugs or alcohol or whatever, you look at the person, you see they're shaking, they lost weight, their eyes are sagging, right? The guy looks like very weak, but actually, the strength that it takes for someone to pull themselves away from an addiction is the most unimaginable koach, the most unimaginable givurah. And unless a person themselves is an addict or lived with an addict, they can't fully understand what it is, what kind of givurah it requires. They think the person is making those choices. They think the person is on purpose destroying the family. They think the person is on purpose maybe that was that way in the beginning, that they had some level of free choice. But at a certain level of addiction, the person has a full-blown sickness. And the gvura that it takes to pull oneself out of that is immense. And it needs to be respected. You know, if you meet someone who tells you that they're in the AA program, you should not look down on them. You should look up to them to understand the gvura that it took to pull themselves out of that place. Now that we understand this concept of gvura being linked with cherut, right? And that idea being planted in the day already from before, from the time of Yitzchak, we might be tempted even to understand one step further according to the logic of Maharal. He's explaining even one step further that perhaps it's not that Pesach comes from the fact that Yitzchak is born on that day, but rather, we're illustrating by drawing it back in time, is expressing this idea that Yitzchak's birth itself on that day was an expression of the fact that in that day was gvura, was an element of cherut that was waiting to be revealed. And in its expression with regards to cherut, that happens in a much later time. And what does it take for that to be revealed? It could be either God deciding, today is the day that I'm going to open up the storehouses of what's here, what's possible, or it could be that it comes from the person themselves. We know when it came to Pesach, that was not from us. When it came to Pesach, God had to step in. And if not for God stepping in, we would not have been able to do it. So where's the gvura latent in the time of cherut if it's God that did it? And the answer is that if you take a look, you'll see that when Avraham has the conversation with God with regards to the Brit Ben HaBetarim, Avraham says, "Bameh edaki irashena." How will I know? And Hashem promises him, "Yado ateda, you should know your children will be sojourners in a land that does not belong to them. Ve'avadum v'inu otam 400 shana. Ve'achrechen, they will work, they'll serve there for 400 years. Ve'achrechen, and after that, Dan anochi, I'm going to come and judge the people that enslave them. And I'll take them out, berchush gadol, etc., etc." When they're ready to leave Egypt, what does God say to Moshe? Please, go tell the Jews to go to their neighbors and to borrow gold and silver, because I promised Avraham Avinu this whole promise, and I don't want that zaken, that elder, to come back to me and say, God, you fulfilled the bit about the slavery, but you didn't fulfill the bit of taking them out with great wealth. So please, let them go and get that wealth from the people. You see over here that an element of the cherut and an element of the reward that was going to take place for the Jewish people was in response to Avraham Avinu. So once we understand this concept, we can realize that the gevurah that is expressed by the Avot, which then manifests itself to the point where Am Yisrael doesn't lose their ability to look like the Avot. They don't change their names. They don't change their clothing. What is the significance of those things? Not changing the name, not changing the clothing, not changing their language. What's the significance of that? The answer is, there was an element of Jewish identity that they still had. And once they identified that way, take a look, by the way, Yaakov Avinu, when he blesses the children, what does he say? Right? V'kareh b'hem shemi v'shem avotai. You'll have many children, and they'll call them in my name and in the name of your fathers. The minhag of having Jewish names is such an important minhag. To me, I don't understand. But never mind whether it's allowed or not allowed. I don't understand where we went off a cliff to name children. Again, I don't want to hurt anybody's names. So if I say one name, that guy's going to get the class forwarded to him. So I'm not going to say any names of that people. But the idea that you can name a name, okay, Rumpelstiltskin, I'll give you a name. I don't know. There's no one that's going to have forwarded the phone call, right? The phone to the class to that guy. But all these ideas, it's an interesting thing. V'kareh b'hem shemi. Even in Egypt, when we didn't have one mitzvah, we still had Jewish names. So what's going on? At the very least, you want to have an English name, alamak, like we say. Arabic name, Yiddish name, great. Have a Yiddish name that they call you, no problem. But you should also have a Hebrew name, a name representing one of our forefathers one of the Tzaddikim, one of the kings of Am Yisrael, one of the great heroines of the Jewish people, so that your children should feel, they should have this sense, this element of Jewish identity. My friends, now we're starting to recognize how Gvura and Cherut come together. It is the Gvura of our forefathers and everything they stood for that planted something in a Jew that doesn't run away. It planted something in a Jew that no matter what, they're not trying to get rid of that identity. So long as we have that, we're still connected to our forefathers. And that's the element of Gvura and Cherut. And my friends, sometimes it takes a tremendous amount of Gvura for Cherut. Now, I am not saying it is time for us to leave America. I'm not saying that. I just want to say one thing. I don't know when the right time will be to leave America. But we have to be aware of and accepting of the fact that that time might come. And let me tell you why. There was a powerful commercial a long time ago with James Earl Jones. You guys remember? James Earl Jones, right? He had a commercial for the Yellow Pages. Now, for the sake of some of our listeners who are beneath a certain age, I don't know if even you guys even know what the Yellow Pages is? It's after your day. What was the Yellow Pages? The Yellow Pages is, if you were a business, how were people going to know that you existed? Where would they find you? You think about the internet now. You think about all these things that we have, right? But back then, right, how would someone even know that you opened a store somewhere? Or that you were a plumber somewhere? Or that you were a veterinarian? Or whatever you were? They turned to the Yellow Pages, which is what gave birth to the most ridiculous names for business ever. Like, as an example, there were numerous stores called AAAAA, AAAAA, Haircuts International. And why? Because it's all alphabetical. So the first guy called himself Aaron, and he beat out Xander, okay? So what happened? Next year, Xander's like, forget Xander, right? I'm upgrading. This guy's name is Aaron, A-R-O-N. I'm going to call myself, for those of you who know, Aaron, right? For those of you who know that sketch, right? Then the next guy is like, I can't go triple A, right? Ron. That just doesn't work. So they just started adding A's. So they would add one. It was the war of the A's. You just added one more A than the next guy the next year, and then you moved up a spot, right? And then there was preemptive adding A's, even if you didn't know that the other guy was going to add an A. So it got completely out of hand. Now, sorry? Now, .ai, SEO, exactly. So we have lots of ways of promoting businesses. However, the idea, again, you can have whatever name you want. You want to call yourself an English name, no problem. But what saved us once was that. And James Earl Jones used to say like this. The commercial was, if someone told you, that was a remark. I don't think I'm ever going to top that impression that I just had right there. If someone told you there was a 99% chance of rain, wouldn't you take an umbrella? That was the ad. And then it flashes on the screen. Well, 99% of people looking for businesses check the Yellow Pages. Can we just stop for a second and think of that number? 99% of people needing a business check the Yellow Page. That's how it worked, right? So you have to be nuts, he would say, not to do it, because 99%. My friends, I want to ask you a question. What if I could tell you something happened 100% of the time? Would you take an umbrella? Yeah, 100% of the time, the countries that we have moved to eventually have become places that were inhospitable environments for us. There has not been one country that we moved to that we didn't leave, right? That's not a country that we moved to, that's our country. There is not one country in the diaspora, not one, zero. In fact, people don't know, even in America, there was an expulsion of Jews under Ulysses S. Grant. Check it out. You'll see it online. A letter drafted to banish the Jews from the territory that he was at that time in charge of. Now, understand what that means. I'm not here to be a fearmonger. That's not my game. That's not my style. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not going to say that if this one gets elected, that one gets elected. None of that. I'm not saying any of that. But I'm just saying is we have to agree that there may be a time. Okay? It takes gvura to achieve cherut. And how many people in Europe didn't leave and stayed that extra bit too long? And the ones that got out are the ones that got out. And the ones that didn't are the ones that didn't. There's a gvura required to take a step that is so far out of your comfort zone. To move to another country. To be able to learn a new language. To be able to file taxes in a new country. It's hard. My friends, why am I giving you this whole introduction? Only for the sake of laying down the foundation of what it looks like on every holiday. Purim is no different than this element that we've been discussing with regards to Passover. Purim also was a day that had within it, or has within it, tremendous kochot. Now I want to say something which sounds a little bit crazy. If you take a look, our Chachamim tell us that when Haman Harasha was tossing lots, so what happened? He tosses lots for the months. And every time he would throw a lot for a month, a batko would come out and say, "Well, you crazy? You think this month you're going to be able to kill the Jews? Don't you know that in this month they do this? Don't you know in this month they have the Korban Pesach? Don't you know in this month?" And every month was getting knocked off the board. Until finally he gets to the last month of the year, Adar, no batko. Now he's looking for a day. He winds up on the 13th day of Adar. Each time he's choosing something, the batko is telling him there's a reason why this won't work. He finally gets to a day where it will work. Now understand what that means. That means that on the day of Yud Gimel Adar, there was a nod from God to Haman's plan. In other words, if something terrible was going to happen, Emunah doesn't mean that bad things, that difficult things don't take place. Our experience tells us, right? Facts, history tells us that negative things take place. Emunah means that there's a plan, that there's a reason for it, that ultimately it will be for our good, whether in this world or in the next world, right? Whether on a personal level or on a national level. But God wanted that this day, if there's going to be a disaster, a tragedy, this is the day. And then what happens? A short while later, God decides that this should be the day that all the Jews are saved. Then Afachu, Asher Yishlatu HaYehudim Hema B'Sonehem. They're going to turn around, take the reins, and rule over those that try to destroy them. How could it be that the same day would be ripe as a day for their destruction and ripe as a day for their renewal? How could that be? How could both of those things be on that day? And therein lies, I think, a powerful idea. What are you saying? I'll explain. How do you have a contradictory overlapping? Why? Why would such a thing be true? So I want to share something with you. Ready for this? This is a crazy one. Every counselor in camp has to be introduced to something which is a bit of a nightmare for them. And it's called the EpiPen. Wow, 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 wow. Okay, what is the EpiPen? A long time ago, nobody had allergies. When I was growing up, we did not know what a peanut allergy was. We laughed in the face of peanut allergies. Okay? Today, camps are peanut-free zones. If you had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and you breathe on a kid, the kid dies. It's crazy. But that's our world. Okay? So what do you have? You have an EpiPen. The pen, what does it give? It gives adrenaline. So all of a sudden, this kid goes into anaphylactic shock. You give the kid adrenaline, and what happens? The body starts fighting back. The heart starts pumping. I don't know if you know this, but adrenaline can bring you back to life, and adrenaline can kill you. There's many things like that. That in the right context, it's something that saves your life, and in the wrong context, it's something that kills you. And I want to maybe perhaps speak about what it was on Purim that embodied that idea. Chachamim tell us that Mordechai commanded Esther. He commanded Esther to go into to Achashverosh. And one of the questions everybody asks is, why does he command her to go into Achashverosh? She's risking her life. What's the point? Sounds a little bit excessive. All they need to do is wait. In 30 days she hasn't been called, she'll be called. Esther is very sure that Achashverosh is going to call her in. But Mordechai insists You got to go in. It's now or never. Right? Chalas, now or never. And if not, it's going to be somebody else. Why is Mordechai saying that? Why is he asking her to do something that she's going to risk her life? In fact, let me make it worse. What Mordechai asked Esther should have been forbidden. Is a person allowed to endanger their life unnecessarily? No, it's a mitzvah in the Torah. So if I know that doing something will be a danger to my life, and I can do the same thing, achieve the same thing, without having danger to my life, I'm obligated not to do it that way. So why does Mordechai ask her to do that? The Chachamim say that what was required for Purim to take place was Mesirut Nefesh, was risking of everything, risking it all. Fascinating idea that on the one level, Haman arrives at this day like by playing Russian roulette, right? It's like gambling, right? And the response to that has to come by the Jewish person that was going to bring about that salvation also taking a gamble, risking something. Mesirut Nefesh. She had to be Moser Nefesh. On a deeper level, of course, for those of you that have studied with us, we've talked about this in various iterations, but that Amalek thrives, their power rests in the doubt that we have in our emunah. So the resolution to that doubt is a doubling down on faith so much that you take a trust fall. When the person uses that, that's the way you undo the element of doubt. So if Haman had achieved this with the Jewish people, the only way to turn that tide with the Jewish people was to double down on Mesirut Nefesh, to show that we could risk it all. And you know why we could risk it all? Because we're not afraid. We're not afraid that this is even a risk. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will save us. He's going to send that golden scepter and he's going to save us. That's how it's going to be, 100%. I'm absolutely sure. My friends, I think oftentimes this gets missed. Because if every holiday gives you something, as an example, the holiday of Pesach, we said, brings freedom. It allows a person to experience freedom when they desperately need it. So Pesach then is an amazing time for a person who's trapped in some way or some form or some shape to be able to pray, to be able to achieve freedom from whatever they want. I once told someone, the guy was trying to figure out the right dates to go for rehab, and I told him that he should go over Passover. Only, of course, if they could arrange chametz and a seder for him. He said, Passover is the worst. I want to be with my family. I said, Passover is the best time, not the worst time. I said, first of all, what better time for an alcoholic to not be at a table than when you must drink 4 cups of wine 2 nights in a row? Right? That's poison for you. Number 2, I said, on a spiritual level, you're trying to be free of something. This is a time where it's easiest to achieve freedom. Anyway, Baruch Hashem, he's in a much better place today. My friends, if that's what Pesach has, then what does Purim give us? And I think a lot of people focus very much on the joy of Purim. And that's wonderful. And that's there. And a person can get that from Purim to bring simcha into their life. But I think also there's an element of Mesirut Nefesh. Mesirut Nefesh is not what we had on Passover, because it wasn't our risk. That's not what took place. Mesirut Nefesh is not Shavuot, because we were showing faith that we would receive it, but we had not yet had the experience of Mesirut Nefesh for it. When do we have this idea of Mesirut Nefesh? The Gemara in Shabbat tells us, Hadar kiblua b'imei Achashverosh. At Mount Sinai there was an element that it was forced upon us. So the Gemara says, Mikan moda'ara ba'le'oraita. Now we have a great answer to get out of judgment. At the end of days, we didn't do this willingly, you forced it on us. Says the Gemara, Hadar kiblua b'yamei Achashverosh. They then re-accepted on day Achashverosh. And once they had that act of Mesirut Nefesh, that they were giving themselves over to God, they were risking it all to be part of Am Yisrael. They had a physical battle, and their response to it was a spiritual response. If you need your strength, are you going to fast? But they understood fasting, coming together, praying together was the response to this. That's Mesirut Nefesh. My friends, if that's the case, then we should not miss out on that element, on that treasure that we could pull out of the days of Purim. To be able to come people who are capable of giving that much more of themselves for the sake of God. Now everyone thinks Mesirut Nefesh means to be burned at the stake. And that's not what it means. That's not what it means. Of course, the maximal level of Mesirut Nefesh means that you die to be a Jew. The auto de phase. The auto de phase where they would burn you at the cross unless you would renounce your Judaism. Today, in order to renounce your Judaism, all you have to do is get an Oscar. But back then, it was a little bit more intense, Or Yehudi or Tzlov, either the Jew or the cross. And when they said that, they didn't mean take the religion. They meant they would nail you to it and burn you alive in the middle of the city. Today, right now, if you go to Spain, in cities like Toledo, right, in other cities, there are squares where they used to have the order of the faith. It's still there. They're marked under the Inquisition of Torquemada in King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, right, in the late 1400s. So my friends, understand this. That's the maximal level of Mesirut Nefesh. But that's not all that Mesirut Nefesh means. Chachamim explain that Mesirut Nefesh means when you give over your Nefesh. Now Nefesh is not the same thing as Neshama. A person's soul has layers, right? Like an onion, donkey, right? We're layered, okay? You have the Nefesh, which is the lowest form of the Neshama, the soul that is in the body. Then you have the Ruach, which the Nefesh HaChaim explains is the connecting part of your soul from your Nefesh, your lower human bodily soul in your body. And then in Shamayim is your Neshama. And that never leaves the heaven. And that's why it remains pure, no matter what you do down here. Okay? The Nefesh could corrupt the Ruach even, potentially, because it's connected to it. But the Nefesh doesn't touch the Neshama. Okay? So the Neshama remains pure forever. Above the Neshama, there's even two higher levels, which are less spoken about because they're more esoteric in nature. And that's Chaya Yechida. Okay? But this idea, the Naran, the three parts of a person's Neshama, the lowest level is Nefesh. The Nefesh HaChaim explains, I think he's qualified because he named his book after Nefesh. Okay? Nefesh HaChaim refers to the spirit that animates a person. So just understand what that means. You have in your body a spirit, a soul that moves you, that brings life to you. That is Nefesh. Okay? The spirit of life, if you will. When someone dies, they look exactly the same the minute after they die and the minute before they die. But what's the difference? Now it's just a slab of meat with bones and sinews. It's not animated. The difference is the Nefesh. That's the Koach HaChiyuni, the power of animation, of life. So my friends, understanding that, we begin to recognize that the word Nefesh means the things that animate and drive a person. That's what Nefesh is. Now, that can be driven by powerfully positive forces, okay? Connection, kindness, love, empathy, compassion. How many difficult things do we do in our life because we feel rahmanut, we feel mercy on somebody. You feel kindness, you feel something in your heart. It might be much easier to do something cruel. It might be much faster. If we were to just bomb the living daylights out of everybody out there, the war would be much faster. And we would lose much less of our children. But the Jewish soul cannot do that. We will never do that. Not because of the UN, not because someone's policing us, but because with or without you, our moral values are so strong that we are protecting, and the rate of civilian to combatant is better for Israel than it has been by any other army in the history of the world. And they have the audacity to lecture us. Now the reason why I bring this up, my friends, is because if that's what Nefesh means, things that drive you in this life, a nefesh could also be something negative. We have in this week's parasha, the nefesh ki teheta. Why didn't you say guf ki teheta? And the answer is because a person's desires through their yetzer hara could become corrupted. And what animates him and motivates him on that nefesh level might be something that isn't a positive thing. Now, since that's the case, my friends, we now understand that mesirut nefesh doesn't only mean giving your soul, it might mean giving your desires. You hear that? It might mean giving up something that you really like. That's what mesirut nefesh means. And if that's what mesirut nefesh means, then we can understand what Esther means when she says, Cha'asher avadati avadati. If I'm with you, if I'm with Achashverosh now, and I go in, I initiate, I did it, then I can never again go back to my husband Mordechai. Ka'asher avadati avadati. I might be lost in this world and in the next. She's moser nefesh. But my friends, I'll ask you, there are so many things in our life that we wish we could do. I had a conversation yesterday with someone about a certain person who's a great person. They have great elements about them, but they have one challenge. And their one challenge is they have a certain character trait that they can't get past. And I said, can someone not talk to him? Can someone not speak to him? And he says, no, he knows. He wishes he wasn't like that. He wishes he didn't act that way or say those things or do those things. He wishes. He hates the fact that that's who he is. That's who he's become. But he can't change it. It's who he is. Mesirut nefesh means finding those things that we wish we did more. We wish we did more of. We wish we did less of, depending on which way is a positive thing. And being able to tap into that place and say, I'm going to give this up. This is my negative thing. I'm going to give this up. I'm stingy. I'm going to find that midah and literally press on it until it busts, until it resists, until it yields to that pressure. I'm a person who doesn't trust. I'm going to teach myself to trust. I'm a person who's always opportunistic, taking care of me all the time, thinking only of me. I'm going to press on that, work on that point until it busts, until it bends to my pressure. That's what mesirut nefesh means. My friends, and now you understand why the day of Purim could be both things. It's a day of tremendous power of mesirut nefesh. On this day, the nefesh has incredible opportunity for it, incredible strength. It's a day of tremendous soul strength. But it could have been used by Haman, or it could have been used by Esther. Who is going to claim that? My friends, you have on the day of Purim, and every other day, but especially on the day of Purim, incredible soul strength, incredible power to overcome something, to tap into that, to be able to say, listen, I know the personal cost of doing this, but it's the right thing. Ka'asher avadati, avadati. What a powerful line. I mentioned the other day, this young soldier who said, we've gone in, we saw all of our friends die. But then he turned to the two brothers of a hostage that were here in this room at that Friday night dinner, and he said, but if the Lebanon front opens and they call my name, I'm back in. What an unbelievable idea. If my name gets called, I'm back in. You know why? For your brother, because it's the right thing. Because you stop existing for yourself and you exist for the people. Could you imagine that this line, this biblical, punchline, Ka'asher avadati avadati, is really what every single soldier is saying every single morning? We look back, we're like, wow, Esther. No, not Esther. Every single person who's a chayal is saying that every single day. I'm going in, and I don't know what will happen to me, but this is the right thing to do. Ka'asher avadati avadati. My friends, that's me and that's you. It's not only for a person who wears a uniform. It's so hard for me to give this up. You know how hard I worked for that money? You want to tell me to walk away from it for the sake of shalom? Impossible. Not doing it. Mesirut Nefesh. You know that if you walked away, it would improve your relationship with the family. You know that. And you say to the rabbi even sometimes, Rabbi, I wish I could. You don't think I wish I could? I can't. And I'll agree with you. So find the day where you have the greatest likelihood of being able to can. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.